Hello, this is Wright from Watauga Lake Dulcimers. I'm making this little video to talk about this instrument in particular, dulcimers in general. How to get you started if this is your first dulcimer. There's some places to find more information, and I'll be giving you a little bit of information on this video. This dulcimer is a little smaller than average. It's about 31 inches long. Body size is 24 inches long, 6 inches wide. Has a vibrating string length or scale of 23 inches. That's the distance between the bridge and the nut. The strings I put on here are meant to be tuned as D, A, and then another D, a higher octave. Right now I've tuned them down to D, A. If I was going to play that all the time, I would put a little heavier string on this one, same as I have on the middle string. I have been playing D, A most of the time I've been playing dulcimers. There are two primary tunings, DAA and DAD. I'm going to talk about both of them a little bit. What I like about DAA is I like the chord patterns. Now you can also play chords, of course, with a DAD tuning, but I don't know them nearly as well. I won't get into them. You can find diagrams on the internet for that tuning in a lot of places. I actually have some on my website for the DAA because you don't find that in as many places. This instrument has a freestanding bridge, and I'll talk about that for a moment. It actually can be moved around if you put on new strings, change the tuning. A lot of things, you might be a little bit less accurate with the notes on some of your frets. And with this you can make very minor adjustments and get it basically perfect. And to set it, it has a 23-inch scale. It actually comes out normally to about 23¼ inches. So if you had totally taken the bridge out for some reason or got knocked out of place, just measure it and set it at 23¼ inches to start with. I use a tuner. Somebody might have perfect pitch, but most of us need a tuner to be perfect. Set the two outside strings exactly where you want them. So I have that tuned to D. The 7th fret is another D, an octave higher. Check that that is just right. This string is tuned to A. That actually came out just a hint sharp. If the note on the 7th fret is sharp, lengthen the length of the scale. So I'm going to slide this bridge back just a tiny bit. It won't take much to make that tiny change. And I don't want to spend too much time on camera getting it perfect. By the way, if it seems like your tuner has some play in it, the string is probably hanging up on the wood a little bit. Just give it a little tug. So anyway, that little tiny motion I did made that string come to perfect. So that's how you check it. If you get the two outside ones just right, you can't do much with the middle one, of course, but it'll be good. So that's setting the bridge. Let's talk about the frets on a dulcimer a little bit. This is a diatonic instrument, therefore it has some long areas between frets and then some shorter areas. And let's talk about why. I have a 1.5 on this instrument. A lot of instruments have that, but a lot of them don't. So fret 1, the next one must be called 1.5, not 2. Here's a 2. So if you don't have this fret, again you get a long gap. And the reason for that, we're in key of D. We need an F sharp and a C sharp. D, E, there's an F sharp, G, A, B, C. Now I said we need a C sharp. So this is the 6, but in this case we need the 6.5. So all modern instruments will have that 6.5 fret. And then we start over again. So there's another D. So later I'm going to talk about playing from tabulature, which is using numbers. So probably the most important thing to get is the numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 6.5, and 7. Now you go beyond that, the next dotted one is a 10 and so on. But basically you're just starting that scale over. So you get another octave out of it. The middle string is A, and that will be very common. The next one, as I said, I have an A. Later I'm going to tune it up to D. So if I'm A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G, G sharp, and up to A again. Now, when I have a string tuned to A, the proper note, remember we said A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G. For this scale, I want the G. So on this A string, I need the 6th fret. On the bass string, tuned to a D, I need the 6.5 fret. Those are kind of important to remember as you look at tabulature later. If you know anything about music, it's nice to know the notes. If you're starting from scratch and you want the simplest way to play, you find some Dulcimer tabulature. In a few minutes we'll look at how to find that, where to find that. And then play by number. Some people might actually take a ruler and write numbers on them and lay it down beside here until they get used to it. But it's really pretty simple. Where I have the first dot, that's a 3. Therefore that's a 1 and a 2 just before it. 4, I have a dot on 5. And I have 2 dots on 7 because that starts a new scale. And it's very common for dulcimers to have dots like that to note where you're at on there. If not, you can just get used to where you have large jumps between frets. A large one, probably a large one unless you have the 1.5 fret. 3 would be a small area. 4 and 5 are bigger. And then of course you're almost always going to have 4 of them close together here for your 6, 6.5, and 7. So that explains the frets. Let's talk about the easiest way to play the instrument. A lot of people will always just play the melody string and these 2 are drones. More advanced tabulature will have you playing some of these other strings. But to get started, just worry about the melody string. Amazing Grace, again, if I have some tabulature, and we'll talk about where to get them later, it's going to say 0, 3, and so on. there I use my fingers to maneuver around the strings. Some people what we call a noter. Some people like to play that way, and basically you just take any simple, probably piece of wood, but you can use other things, and slide it along. Some women like to have long nails, might not like pressing on those strings as much. Noter might be an answer to that. Also, it has a different sound, and some people like that sound a lot. So get used to both a little bit if you have the opportunity. So that's playing on the melody string. And we talked about chords briefly. Later I'll show you some chord patterns. And this is DAA tuning. Next we'll talk just a little bit about DAD tuning. Okay, I've tuned this string up to D. So it's the same note as the bass, higher octave. One thing I like about this tuning is because they're the same, if I've learned to play the melody on one line, I can play exactly the same way on the bass string. So So that gives you a little more variety and still not having to do anything fancy with your fingers. It's just getting used to playing on the two different strings. Okay, another little trick I like, since I frequently play DAA, if I drop this middle string from A down to G, you notice that sounds different. Basically, I can now play in key of G. If I had learned a song playing DAA, I can use exactly that same pattern, but now I'm in key of G. So and now I can play that same song on the bass string. So that gives you some ideas about what you can do with the dulcimer. And next, hoping that you have an internet connection. That is a good place to learn a whole lot of things from a lot of different people. So I'm going to go to the computer and trap a few screenshots and give you some information about where to get a lot more information about dulcimers and tabulators and so on.